Well, thank you very much, Keith, and also thank you to Judith Patton for bringing this excellent conference to Glasgow. As the Minister for Tourism, I would urge you to, whilst you're here, select a Scottish holiday on your app this year. Now, it's a great pleasure to spend some time away from the election campaign, which has been a somewhat long one, but canvassing, as those of you who have ever undertaken it, is a reliably unpredictable experience, as this true story from last week illustrates. A gentleman in my part of Scotland, in Inverness, came up to me and said, "You're Fergus Ewing, aren't you?" I said, "Yes, I am." And he said, "You're Minister for Tourism, aren't you?" And I said, "Yes, I am." And then he said, "I'm not voting for you." And I said, "Would you mind, sir, explaining why not?" And he said, "Because there's too many tourists in the Highlands, and you're spoiling them." So if that proves anything, it is that you can't please all of the people all the time. And perhaps it's not wise to try so to do. That's about, I'm afraid, Keith, the only thing I'm going to say about the election in my remarks. But I am delighted that Glasgow is the home of this conference because, as the previous speakers have pointed out, Glasgow is playing an enormous role in taking forward the low-carbon agenda, in particular renewable energy. And one of the reasons why this is so is the excellent relationship that exists between government, industry, and academia, as Sir Jim will no doubt talk about, and my friend Gordon has also mentioned. And I see that partnership as a sort of modern triumvirate. And where it works well, we can all move forward and make progress in renewable energy and in the low-carbon agenda. We know that we have in Scotland excellent renewable energy assets in our weather, our indifferent weather, but also the talents of our people. So harnessing those two with the modern triumvirate is, from my perspective as the Minister for Energy over the past 4 years, been the way to achieve positive outcomes in Scotland. And this has led now to there being around, according to UK government figures, some 20,000 jobs in the renewable energy sector in Scotland. And last year, we saw us make great progress in respect of the proportion of electricity generated from renewable sources. The proportion of electricity consumed in Scotland generated from renewable sources is 49.6%, well on the way to achieve the interim target of 50% by 2015. So almost half of our gross electricity consumption from renewables is supplied from renewables. That's tremendous progress over the past 8 years. And the question is now, how do we drive that forward? What decisions do we make? And how do we achieve even greater success? Well, I'm convinced that one of the real benefits of all energy is providing a showcase to the innovation that is carried on within the sector. I've heard Ian Marchant talk in previous discussions about how we've seen onshore wind develop, where perhaps 10 years ago the most powerful turbine was around about 1 megawatt. Now it's, 8-10 times that. That's a very simple example. But one of the themes I want to address today is that innovation in Scotland and innovation throughout the UK and the world is what will drive success in renewables and enable the cost challenge to be met and costs to be driven down, something which in the long term, of course, is necessary and it will happen. I'd like just to address fairly quickly, if I may, some of the achievements that we've seen in Scotland over the past years. Firstly, in marine energy. Wave energy is relatively young, and we intend to continue to provide it with the support it needs to become a thriving industry. Of course, we have had setbacks. We have, however, seen substantial quantities of electricity generated from a variety of different devices, and reliability and sufficiency are therefore the two challenges that remain to be overcome. That is why we have set up Wave Energy Scotland last November with a budget of over £14 million. Highlands and Islands Enterprise run WES on our behalf, and they are making swift progress. The first £7 million technology innovation call for power takeoff systems was launched in March, and 4 more will follow. Of course, we need the right leadership, and I'm delighted, therefore, to announce today that Tim Hurst has been appointed as the Managing Director of WES following a rigorous recruitment process, and I offer my congratulations and support to Tim and his team. Now, many of you will be aware of last week's announcement that Atlantis, the company behind Maygen, the world's largest tidal array, has reached agreement to acquire marine current turbines. The deal brings the potential for a turbine assembly plant to be located at Nigg Energy Park, further establishing Scotland as a centre of expertise. That is a great step forward. And I'm pleased to say that there's a competition being launched by the European Marine Energy Centre, EMEC, today, and one lucky winner will receive a full environmental technology verification, which could help unlock private sector funding, which, as we all know, is vital in this industry. I think I can spot Neil Kermode there in the audience, so we fully support his team and their efforts. And also, EMEC announced more good news last month when Sustainable Marine Energy agreed a contract which will see them deploy a 1 megawatt array of 5 tidal systems at EMEC over the next 2 years. We also recognise the success of small companies in both wave and tidal field, companies such as Albatern and Nova, which are achieving great things, harnessing the benefit of the triumvirate. In offshore wind, we are determined to make the most of our huge resource. I've granted planning permission for over 4 gigawatts of capacity. So far, just over 1 gigawatt has secured a CFD subsidy. That's Beatrice and Nartna-Gui. However, we are hopeful that EDPR's Murray Firth and Repsol's Inchcape will be successful in the auction later this year. Scotland has been at the forefront of offshore wind R&D. For example, the 2 5-megawatt Beatrice demonstrators in the Murray Firth were ahead of their time. And we also hope to continue developing floating onshore wind, which can help us take advantage of our resource as well as reducing costs. We are also making progress in a whole range of other areas, in renewable heat, in solar energy, which is seeing a new invigorated approach with a Scottish trade body recently established here, in biomass, in anaerobic digestion. We need more pump storage facilities, as Keith Anderson has rightly said, and we need to see that being taken forward. And we continue to believe that onshore wind plays a central and valuable part in supporting our electricity needs. On island renewables, further progress has been made across the sector as a whole, and I'm pleased that the progress in unlocking the potential of our islands has derived from the Scottish Island Renewables Delivery Forum, which I co-chaired with Ed Davey. You may or may not know that that forum was, I believe, sui generis, the only one of its type, where Scottish and UK governments worked together on a committee with a specific remit for a clear purpose in taking forward a particular set of challenges. I think that's a good approach to adopt to problems, to get in the room and sort them out. That is the sort of constructive approach which I advocate and will continue to seek to encourage in our dealings with the UK government, whatever that creature may turn out to be. I broke my vow there by actually commenting on the election. There we are. I am very encouraged that She Transmission and Ofgem are taking action which will shorten the time that is taken to assess the investment cases, the special needs case for the Islands Links. And that good work has come about because of the delivery forum and the willingness of all participants to play a constructive part. If we can connect the islands to the UK, and it's ironic in a sense, is it not, in the United Kingdom that the islands are disconnected, but if we can do that, then the benefits to people on the islands for the rest of this century I think cannot be over-exaggerated. It will lead to enormous opportunities, particularly since fuel poverty in our islands is greater than perhaps anywhere else in the UK. Fuel poverty that comes from the severe cold caused by the wind can be addressed by the financial benefits that can be derived from harnessing the power of the wind. That surely would be natural justice in its purest form. So we will take that forward in just a few weeks' time. I also want to talk about the Isles project, because the Scottish Government has been the lead partner for the Irish-Scottish links on the Isles project, an EU-funded cross-border collaboration which is now in its second phase. And it aims to facilitate development of offshore renewables and interconnection and address issues which are common across the EU. The first phase concluded that an interconnected offshore grid network between the UK and Ireland is technically possible and could have significant economic benefits. I'm happy to tell you that the findings of the second phase will be outlined here at All Energy at 2 p.m. today in a grid session chaired by the Scottish Government's Head of Energy, Chris Stark. We are also driving forward local and community ownership. The more communities throughout Scotland and the UK support renewables, the more they have a stake in renewables, not necessarily just community benefit receiving a cheque, but having a share of ownership, the greater the support and the more profound the understanding of the benefits of renewable energy as a whole. So the Scottish Government is working in the triumvirate to encourage more communities to consider owning a stake in future developments. We're well on our way to meeting our 500 megawatt target. That will be achieved, and that's perhaps because of projects like Point and Sandwick in the Isle of Lewis, 9 megawatts, the biggest community-owned project in the UK. We expect it to be operational this year. It will generate £1 million for those communities each year. What a terrific thing. That's something, ladies and gentlemen, I urge you to support. If you want to know more about it and how we go about it, myself and my officials and the Enterprise Network are very willing to help you with that. It requires tenacity, it takes time, but we de-risk this and we provide resources to enable you to complete this. And I would like to pay tribute to private bodies like Santander and public bodies like REEF, Renewable Energy Investment Fund, and of course the Community and Renewables Energy Scheme, CARES, which all have a part to play. Just yesterday, I met with around about 15 to 20 banks and other funders in order to discuss the practical issues which are barriers to taking forward this challenge. I think there is across both sides of the border a support for community ownership, so I'm keen that we work together to achieve more. We also have delivered support for a number of local projects, £21 million announced just last month from our Local Energy Challenge Fund. And these projects are worth mentioning. They're all interesting, a wide variety of projects. A water source heat pump to provide low-cost district heating for over 500 homes in Coole, near Fort William, one of many district heating schemes we're taking forward. Innovative heat batteries as part of a project which could help alleviate fuel poverty for 1,000 tenants across Falkirk and the Lothians, and renewably generated hydrogen for use in a range of applications in Fife. These projects demonstrate how we support innovation, how we take it forward in practical projects, and we want to do more. So we intend to run a second challenge fund subject to the next spending round, and £500,000 will be available this year to support feasibility and development. Ladies and gentlemen, as I come towards closing, could I say that it's a great pleasure working as Minister of Energy to work very closely with many of you. I can recognise some of the many faces sitting out in the audience, and I'm available to work with all of you to take forward projects for the good of Scotland. It does, I think, help if you're able to be a minister in the Energy Department for longer than 6 months or a year. I have known 4 different energy ministers in the UK in my brief time. And I think perhaps if they'd stuck with Charles Henry, who was the first one, I don't think there would have been too many people complaining, perhaps other than the 3 people who succeeded him. But the serious point is that it takes the time to get to know you, to get to understand a bit about how your sectors work. And there's many sectors represented here, and we support all of the renewable sectors. So I do hope to have the opportunity to continue to serve as the Minister for Energy in Scotland. It's a terrific opportunity and it's great fun. And could I close by thanking all of you for the work that you have done in so many ways to advance the cause of renewable energy in Scotland. We've achieved great things. There is absolutely no reason, with the political will and clear, consistent and unqualified support for renewable energy in the new partners in the UK government, whoever they may be, to continue to drive forward that success in the renewable energy agenda. Thank you very much indeed for listening to me this morning.
Mr. Ewing, Councillor Matheson, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It's a great pleasure to have the opportunity to speak at All Energy here in Glasgow for the first time. I like the sound of that. And if I paraphrase a statement I normally keep for engineers, reflecting on Gordon's statement, you can always tell a Glaswegian, just not very much. But Gordon's passion is infectious, and you heard the commitment from Fergus as well. It's been a consistent part of the Scottish energy journey over the past 5 years or so. Again, let me echo the warm welcome to All Energy, to Judith and the team. It's been a pleasure working with her over the past few years. I've been a regular attendee and contributor, and it's great now to see the biggest renewable energy conference now being coupled with a genuine cauldron for renewable energy know-how in terms of industry, academia, and indeed the public sector partners here based around Glasgow that really are driving the agenda. As you've heard from Mr. Ewing, the backdrop continues to be challenging in the UK and more generally in terms of regulation, risk and investment. But we should also bear in mind the context within which much of what we are discussing over the next couple of days sits, and in which our industry operates with regard to climate change and emission targets. Sometimes the nearness of the challenges we face on a day-to-day basis occasionally masks the reason why we're on this journey in the first place. And let's just remember one or two of the statistics. Remember that Scotland and the UK governments have committed to targets to achieve an 80% reduction in carbon emissions by 2020. That 80% reduction level is based on scientific assessments that is necessary to restrict climate change impacts to a 2% increase in global temperatures, critically important for our future. But achieving that target will require major change in energy production and energy consumption, another part of the equation that we sometimes forget. It's important the infrastructure is right, the sources are proper and investable, but we need to remember that demand use is a critical part of the equation as well. Though if this target is to be met, and it's not entirely clear how that will map out in the next 20 plus years, renewables, carbon capture and storage, low carbon networks, etc., and indeed socio-economic change will be likely to have major impacts on the resulting solutions. In the EU, from which 10% of global greenhouse gases come, 2% from the UK, 0.2% from Scotland. The target is 20% greenhouse gas emission reduction by 2020 compared to the 1990 levels. And of course, EU is on target to meet that 20% target, but that is in no small measure due to the global recession, which has slowed the EU energy consumption. So there are many policy instruments that have been put in place, including carbon emissions trading at national, EU and international levels, incentives for renewables, which still remain critically important, energy efficiency incentives occasionally, and progress is being made, but the experience is mixed and the pace is often very frustrating, and occasional policy interventions that take us off track can be enormously frustrating, and we've heard some broad reference to that this morning. But I will make another recent history reference that we need to bear in mind. Lord Nick Stern, some 8 years ago, produced a very important report that we need to bear in mind. It was a substantial 700-page report which was about the economics of climate change. And let me summarise very briefly. The report identified climate change as the greatest market failure that could present a unique challenge for economics and society. It recommended early action, and we saw much of that begin, and agreed that the benefits of that early action could significantly outweigh the cost of not acting. He stated, and it's to be fair to be said, not without controversy, that without action, the overall cost of climate change would be equivalent to losing 5% of global GDP annually. So the macroeconomic case was made by Stern, and that kicked off much of what we've been doing in the UK, and in many ways, you've heard from Fergus what the Scottish Government has been doing over recent years. Another suggestion, importantly, which I think is very important to all energy, is that the opportunity that flows from that action base to create new industries, to create new economic opportunity, and to build jobs and growth. So let me make a few comments in the context of Scotland in particular, and I'll broaden out some of the comments around three pillars in particular: skills, innovation, and I couldn't agree with Fergus more about innovation being at the heart of what we must do, and all energy should be a driver for this. And let me begin by referring to one or two high-level economic statistics. Let's take renewables worldwide. In 2014, some $270 billion was invested in renewable energy capacity, around 17% higher than the previous year. That's encouraging. Global renewable power capacity reached 1,560 gigawatts at the end of 2013, made up by hydro, 64%, and wind, 20%, and of course, that proportion is growing. And renewables generated an estimated 22.1% of the world's electricity in 2013. I am a firm believer in a mixed generation solution, but renewables is a key part of that, as many of the other sources are as well. And Scotland, the UK and Europe depend on that security and mixed mode, as well as a firm grid across which we can transfer energy. Renewables in Scotland, as we know, we have an abundance of renewable sources. You felt the high winds and seen the water as you walked to the conference venue this morning, but we have a very compelling ambition to become a centre for global investment in renewable energy and low-carbon technology, built round, and I will stress again, talent, innovation, and driving as fast as we can the right investment and regulatory environment in which we build this industry. As of December 2014, to reiterate what you heard this morning, Scotland had some 7.2 gigawatts of installed renewable energy generation, comprising over 1.5 gigawatts of hydro and 5,000 megawatts, at some 69% from onshore wind, and a growing offshore wind of some 197 megawatts. So it is growing, and it's encouraging that we drive that forward. Let me turn briefly to skills. At our peril, we imagine skills as some kind of tap we can turn on and off, that schools, colleges, and universities can simply respond to a demand that fluctuates year by year. That is not the case. These take long-term commitments. It takes enormous coordination between our educational establishments. And let me tell you, colleagues, those of you that are not so familiar with the Scottish scene, there has never been a better coordinated educational supply side than we have currently in 2015. The College Energy Skills Partnership, the Energy Technology Partnership, which I have the privilege of chairing, are conjoined, responding to a demand statement, but the demand statement must follow through. So projects must flow, economic growth must flow, investment opportunities must be there, or this machine doesn't work. But remember, skills are critical to attracting investment and underpinning the competitiveness and the effectiveness of our industry. Let me give you some brief statistics, particularly around renewables. In a recent report from renewables, we had an estimate from Scottish Renewables of almost 12,000 full-time equivalent jobs in the renewables industry. And in grid, some 5,200 technical and engineering jobs, and growing, including Tier 1 contractors, an estimate from EU Skills. And in terms of skills and learning activity, following publication of the first skills investment plan that Fergus and I were involved in commissioning some 4 years ago by Skills Development Scotland, there is now considerable response in responding to demand statements. But again, for those of you from industry and commerce, this cannot be a passive demand. This has to be a conjoined effort where the demand is not only identified, but industry and government must work with those that do the education to provide the skills base from which we build. There's been a 46% increase in engineering and energy modern apprenticeship starts. Enormously important. This pyramidal approach, I would naturally concentrate at the top end with PhDs, masters and bachelors, but there is an enormous opportunity in job creation and the skills that are required by industry at the modern apprenticeship level through ONC and HNC. There's been a 5% increase in engineering and technology undergraduate starts in our universities, and 68% increase in graduates from Scottish universities entering employment in the energy and engineering sector. But let me remind you, this is not a binary condition where we can simply give you an additional 1,000 graduates at a sudden request. We have to have a long-term strategy and work together in producing the talent we need to drive the industry. Brief comment as I close in terms of research and innovation. Scotland benefits, and I've mentioned from the Energy Technology Partnership. This is a unique consortium of 12 of Scotland's universities. It is the largest of its type in Europe, with some 250 academics and over 800 researchers working collaboratively. And it beggars belief, sometimes universities are thought to require a lot of adult supervision, but when we have the opportunity and we have the culture that we've been creating over the past 5-6 years or so, we are showing to ourselves how much more powerful we are together, but also we are showing how much more we can contribute to an innovation-led economy. We're addressing wind and marine technologies, grid technology, carbon capture and storage, demand side and energy efficiency, bioenergy and energy storage and conversion across our universities. And we celebrate each other's distinct skills. Alongside the technology, we have colleagues in economics, policy and regulation, because it's, of course, technological innovation is key, but we need to create the correct conditions that tracks the technological innovators into outcomes that can be invested. Our flagship programme, the Energy Industry Doctorate Programme, this year will see its 100th PhD student. Each one of these co-sponsored by industry, utilities, OEMs, and very importantly, an increasing number of innovative SMEs. Put alongside two of the UK's Centres for Doctoral Training, hosted here in Scotland, in grid, wind and marine, we have a community of over 300 PhD students that are going to be drivers for innovation in this industry, and many of them driving directly into the industrial base here in Scotland. So, talent is critical. In Scotland, and Fergus made passing reference to this, our agencies, Scottish Enterprise and Highlands and Islands, have led a £200 million investment from public funds, making that available to drive and accelerate commercialisation of the next generation of low-carbon technologies through instruments such as POWERS, SIFT, NRIF and REEF, and also Wave Energy Scotland, a very important step just at the beginning of the year. Edinburgh hosts the Green Investment Bank, an opportunity for a £3.8 billion co-investment in carbon reduction strategies. My own Chancellor, Lord Smith, a very dynamic and focused individual, another son of Glasgow, has made an enormous impact in recent years across the social and economic spectrum, is keen to get as many proposals, such as you heard from Gordon, on the lighting project in Glasgow, but there are still lots of opportunities for community renewables and other innovative investments. You've heard about the Offshore Renewable Energy Catapult, where I'm Deputy Chairman. That is co-hosted adjacent to my university, and this journey, the technology readiness level journey, is something that Scotland has bought into, where our industry base meets closely with our academic base to accelerate what we need to get new innovation. Andrew Jameson and his team are there to make sure that the adoption and deployment of new technologies drives the cost reduction agenda. And recent studies have shown, and I think Benj will be mentioning this as well, that the £100 or indeed the €100 megawatt hour is not far from reach now. Just yesterday, we launched our Energy Policy Centre at Strathclyde. That policy driver, I cannot stress enough, can make or break this industry in the near future. We are hoping to have greater positively disruptive impacts, and delighted that Ian Marchant is the chairman of our advisory board there, where we bring together academics, private and public sector actors to make sure that we have a joint vision of solutions to drive this industry harder. And in my own institution, our Technology and Innovation Centre is now up and running. some £100 million investment, one of the biggest innovation investments in Europe. Adjacent to that is the Innovo building invested by Scottish Enterprise, where the Offshore Renewable Energy Catapult is hosted. Two of the Scottish Innovation Centres are there, the Industrial Biotechnology Innovation Centre, the Sensors Innovation Centre, some 1,500 people concentrating on grand challenges around energy, infrastructure, and enabling technologies. And that's the scale of the challenge, colleagues. It's important that we work singularly, but working in a grand challenge mode is enormously important. And I also commend other interventions from Innovate UK, for example, the Energy Catalyst programme that I hope some of you have bid successfully into as another accelerator for what you need to do. The ambitions to grow that programme to £50 million plus, again, is encouraging that our various governments are concentrating with their eyes on the ball. And later this year, we'll see the start-up of a new energy systems catapult, which, as we'll understand, it's not just about electricity, it's about heat and combustible gases, and taking a systems integration approach, much of which, Gordon, is going to be built around cities, that we can integrate heat networks, electricity networks, and combustible gas networks, but taking a systems perspective. And for those of you that aren't familiar with that emerging agenda, I encourage you to have a look at that. So let me conclude by also reverting to my own domain, and that's in electrical networks. There is a fantastically exciting project underway in Scotland now, and that's the Western Link, or the Western Bootstrap, led by Keith's company, Scottish Power, and Scottish Power Networks in particular. This is a high-voltage DC network, very innovatively designed because it's going to connect into the AC network down south. The driver originally, and of course it's still pertinent, to take Scotland's low carbon harvest of energy into the rest of the UK network and beyond into Europe. But of course, to support further security of supply, this is a bi-directional link. That work is underway, capacity 2.2 gigawatts and expected to be operational by 2016-17. In terms of Ofgem's impact, we were very involved in Project Transmit and its various staging ports to the journey, Keith. But we see through Rio T1 and transmission. In Scottish Power, there's a major project underway of an excess of £2 billion investment in transmission over the next 8 years. And in the Rio ED1, the distribution settlement, across the industry in the UK, some £17.5 billion worth of expense. So this could be enormously transformative for those of you involved in energy sources, energy transport solutions, and energy reduction strategies. So let me conclude just by reiterating. Our opportunity, our industry, our global competitiveness is critically dependent on talent and innovation, but none of that will be realised without creating the correct regulatory and investment conditions. That's a challenge we put to our colleagues in government, having a coherent and powerful voice within the industry, i.e. working together collaboratively, and also having academia playing its part in a challenge mode, producing the people you need to thrive, but also driving some of the ideas you need to succeed. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure all energy plays a significant and growing role in all of that agenda, and I commend those of you that have brought this to Glasgow, and I look forward to the engagement over the next couple of days. Thank you very much indeed.